value from success, growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold-copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society, his website, resourceworks.com. Welcome back to the show, Stewart, and hopefully you can move around today without too much turkey left over.
Well, yeah, that's always a challenge.
It certainly is. Stewart, what's the influence resources have on bringing needed capital for Canada and capital investment?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question because if you follow the progress of large projects, be it bridges, football stadiums, new hospitals, you know, it takes a lot of money to do that, obviously, and it's borrowed if it's a civic project. Bonds are issued. When it comes to natural resource projects, which are the kind of things I tend to look at, I'm talking about new mines or pipelines or other upstream investment in oil and gas. These are things we do a lot of in Canada. It's pretty obvious that there's a very intensive goods and services supply chain. You know, plans need to be made and filed, and permits need to be issued, and foundations excavated and poured, and wells drilled, and you know, pipelines determined for routes and built, and marine terminals created. It's a long, long list. I went back into the British Columbia statistics. Every year the Ministry of Finance issues its report on the economic performance, and they always put in some of the key numbers on capital investment intentions, they call it. And I actually looked at that over the last 25 years, so 1996 to 2020 tables. Here's what I found out in terms of how much money was invested into natural resource sector capital projects. I've got the number for you here. I've never seen this anywhere else, Jim. First time anyone's hearing it. The number, $131 billion invested into BC over that time period, just in natural resources. What do you think of that number?
Over which period?
25 years, from 1996 to 2020.
And that's all natural resources?
Just natural resources. So that doesn't include the utilities sector and real estate and other things. That's really just for the core resource things.
And during most of that period, we had Liberal government / so-called light. Are they more encouraging of investment in the natural resource sector than the NDP is?
Well, you know, based on the last couple of years, the capital investment performance actually shows that the NDP is doing pretty well. For projects that were started, is granted under previous governments, Site C, the LNG Canada, and Coastal GasLink pipeline project that are sort of one big project, and Trans Mountain. In fact, one of those was actively opposed by the current government, so it's happening anyways. Who gets the credit for it? Well, whoever's in government gets the credit when it comes to the day when they snip the ribbon on it. So, you know, I think one thing that did happen here in the early and mid-2000s was an enormous amount of upstream gas investment in northeast BC. So those were years of very large amounts, but that continued, you know, even after the 2014 oil price crash that also affected gas prices. We saw years when there would be $5 billion in investment just in the gas sector in the Northeast. And it would be spent on local pipelines, on water treatment facilities, on drilling. You know, one well drilled using modern fracking technology, it's almost like building an apartment building in Vancouver in terms of the, you know, technical intensity, the permitting processes, the labor force required. but you don't see any of it. You just see a little bit of activity on the surface, but it's taken an enormous amount of effort. That's why the numbers are so big. I once did a back of the envelope calculation on that $5 billion in 1 year. Had that been spent, let's just say for instance, into transportation and tourism infrastructure in the Lower Mainland, that would get you a casino hotel the size of the Wynn in Vegas, 3,000 plus rooms, plus its own SkyTrain to get there from downtown. That would, cost about $5 billion. Imagine the news story, the front page, if that was announced, that was happening. That would be the biggest story of the century. Of course, when $5 billion was spent routinely every year in the Northeast, out of sight, in natural gas, was it even in the papers? No. No attention paid to it whatsoever. But it's just as big an economic driver. In fact, probably more so than if you had a Wynn hotel with its own dedicated SkyTrain line. How about that?
How much then, I guess it's the old, most people live in cities and we're isolated from the real work that Canada does, which is develop natural resources, and some of them are quite sustainable if you look at forestry.
Yeah.
So we're not aware of it, and look at all these protesters who are against mining. Well, our modern lifestyle, just going into the Bronze Age, 10,000 years ago, what that did for human civilization. And that was dug out of the ground, and we still have to find minerals. I haven't seen any protester yet show up who didn't have a cell phone in their hand. What's in a cell phone? 61 different minerals?
Yeah, and the fact they've got the money in their pocket to be able to buy a cell phone is probably, they got it from somewhere. They earned it, or their mom and dad gave it to them, or someone who had money coming in was able to help finance that phone. Where does the money come from? Well, in BC, a year like this year, 2020, what a terrible year it's been in so many ways. Well, despite all of that, we've got these 4 major energy-related mega projects that I mentioned, the 2 pipelines, LNG Canada and Site C, all going on at the same time. So you look at the capital spending for those projects, plus you get the associated transportation, manufacturing, construction, and utilities going on, much of which is to support those projects. You've got $27 billion in economic activity. And we talk about people saying we're transitioning to a greener future, but there's no money attached to that greener future. All of the proposed alternatives, not only are they, in many cases, questionable in terms of the viability of often untested technology. It might sound wonderful. I'm not saying it doesn't sound wonderful. I'm saying it may not be tested and be able to perform. But more certain is that it will not be capable of generating export income, because that takes a thing. If you're in trade, you need to trade things. It's very limited, the market for electricity from BC. We've got some great long-term revenue from the Columbia Basin agreements to go back half a century that continue to bring in a lot of revenue, but it's actually not that big compared to, our copper exports, for example, or coal or natural gas. Those are things that they put on ships or into pipelines and off they go. Electricity is sort of a thing, but you can't put it on a ship and send it to China or India where it's desperately needed. Instead, they need to get forms of energy where it's of a more physical, tangible form, and then they can convert it into energy locally in their own electricity systems. And that's what the world will pay for. So the idea that, something that creates so much of the prosperity that people think of as the Canadian way of life comes from those things. And so whenever I hear someone saying, let's stop doing all those things, life will be better than ever if we do that. Well, how will it be better than ever if we don't have any money? I don't understand that, Jim. I just don't. And no one's been able to explain it to me.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, Alberta is trying to get out of just being a producer of oil and gas, so they've decided they should make plastics. And their next proposal has been, why don't we produce hydrogen, which when you burn it produces heat and water. That's it. And now they're being criticized for that plan. Is Alberta a damned area where no matter what they try to do to get their economy going again, that people don't support it?
Yeah, well, I think you're referring to the plastic ban that was announced last week by the federal government. They want to get rid of things like plastic forks and spoons and plastic takeout food containers, plastic bags, plastic beer holders, the rings. It's not a complete ban on plastics, but it seems to be going in that direction. And, many will be wondering if we do those things, what comes next? I mean, you go into a hospital for any treatment, and everything you touch or that touches you, the disposable, sterilized things they use, that's made of plastic. So long into the future, we're going to be able to need those things and get them from somewhere. So we need to have a viable plastics industry for probably all time. Bioplastics, well, yeah, it sounds great, but is it going to be something we can develop at scale? I think there's tremendous potential for the forest industry to be part of that. It shouldn't be either or, this but not that. We can have a plastic industry based on the liquids-rich natural gas that we've got, particularly in the Montney. A lot of that's in BC, so it's a good BC story too. So I think there's some reluctance there in places like Alberta to feel good about banning plastic when it's clear that this substance is going to be needed for a long time. And when you do have investors who are lining up to spend money, billions of dollars, to make the right investments for that, only for there to be this message from Ottawa that not only are they getting rid of certain products, but they're also declaring plastic as a class to be a toxic substance. So here's another case of agenda pushers who are looking for tactical ways to crowd out the thing they don't like. I mean, they just don't like any sort of oil and gas products, or as they call them, fossil fuels. And they'll, showing that they'll do basically anything in order to thwart this progress. And usually what happens with this kind of thing is the law of unintended consequences immediately kicks in. We'll be getting plastics in the future. Hopefully we'll get them from Canada and not from, Russia or Saudi Arabia. Why don't we make it ourselves? That would be a really smart thing to do. So hopefully level heads will prevail, and we will be able to enhance the domestic plastics industry. But it's an uphill battle right now.
Well, my God, just sitting here at my desk in my office, the telephone is made of plastic, the fan is made of plastic, my telephone is covered in a case made out of plastic. I have some vitamin pills here. They're in a plastic container. The plug-ins for the computer, they're all plastic. The computer case itself is plastic. The speakers are plastic. The Scotch tape is in a plastic container. I think, as long as it's recyclable, what's wrong with it?
Well, we heard it here first. Jim Goddard, more plastic than Barbie.
Well, exactly. And, but I'm saying just make it recyclable plastic, not the one-use stuff.
No, that is the future of, call it the circular economy. I was watching that Life of David Attenborough on Netflix. I mean, it's great. This guy spent his whole life, he's in his 90s now, he's still going and still making films, talking about what he's seen change over his lifetime. I mean, you can't watch that documentary and think, wow, we got to do something differently here. And I think this is where the the debate is. You have these very different arguments being made about what is this transition, what is the change, how do we change it. I think everyone is in the mood for change and improvement. I certainly am. But it doesn't mean that every idea proposed is a good idea. And I think this is where we're falling into some potential danger areas for the future of our country, its viability economically in particular, and its ability to be a contributor to global progress in whether it's climate or the materials goods that people in a growing population, and the population is definitely growing. It may in the future at some point in time shrink, but right now it's growing.
Well, the Goddard the Goddard report, if you don't think I'm concerned about plastics, I was the first to bring up the issue of plastic in our food, because I thought with those giant plastic islands in the middle of the ocean, fish must be eating those. Have there been any studies about what kind of health effects are there if you eat fish that have been eating plastic? Nothing had been done on it. I don't know if anything's being done about it now, but they're finding plastic particles in rain in the Arctic. So obviously we need to get control of it, but like most natural resources and things that we've built, yeah, they can get out of control, but it's like atomic sciences. You can make bombs out of it, or you can make eco-friendly reactors that generate power and make isotopes for medicine. It's what you intend to do with it and how you handle it.
Yeah, and sometimes we solve one problem that's not the actual problem that needs to be solved. And in the case of the plastic ban, you look through that announcement, they're saying we don't really understand how microplastics can be gotten out of the ocean, and so we don't know what to do with that issue. I mean, I would say, why don't you go down to Shoppers Drug Mart, find all the products that have microplastic little bits of sheen in them and things like that, these consumer products, and ban the use of those products. Well, there's probably some industry that's against that, but that would get rid of a lot of the microplastics that are deliberately put in there. And then there's plastics that come from the breakdown of bigger pieces of plastic, and that's another issue. But instead what they've done is try to solve the plastics crisis by addressing an area that isn't actually a crisis at all. Like, we don't have a problem with plastic takeout food containers. We actually have a solution with plastic takeout food containers, that being all these often independent restaurants, ma and pa operations that have weathered wave 1 and 1.5 of COVID. They're still standing, and they're selling most of their food in takeout containers now. So here's the friendly old government. What are they doing? They're saying, oh, we're going to increase the cost of your restaurant operations by making you buy some exotic, supposedly recycled or something product to, send your food deliveries out in. That's how they're helping the restaurant industry get through COVID. What problem does that solve? I mean, when you go for a walk in the park or on a sidewalk anywhere in Canada, do you see rubbish strewn around? No, you don't. The plastic waste in the oceans that we're told is a crisis, and you can see areas of the world where it is a huge problem. I've walked on beaches in Asia. I know this problem. Why not solve the problem that exists rather than this one that doesn't exist, and then cover yourself in glory for having done so as if you're solving the real problems? That's why this particular ban, I think, has been poorly communicated, because it just doesn't make sense.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration, with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, there's talk in Washington State of the state getting its power from wind and solar. Is that practical, and could they afford it?
Well, there has been talk for a number of years about replacing primarily the natural gas that is used in Washington state, and replace it with wind from Montana, from Idaho. And if you've driven through those states, you'll know that there's lots of wind turbines out there. They also envision a future with a lot of solar. I was at a conference a couple of years ago on the border of Washington state and Oregon, down near Vancouver, Washington. And it was all the utilities people from around the whole region. And it was a hot topic. Washington was talking about going totally renewable, mostly without hydro as a renewable, which kind of implies that you're looking at wind and solar, which in this far up, it's from the equator. It's not as easy to get solar the way they do in the sunnier parts. And wind, well, you have to put wind turbines up. You have to go through local processes. Usually you've got ornery neighbors who don't like wind any more than they might like some, other kind of project around. Anyways, they put a price tag. So for Washington state, which is 7.6 million residents, bigger than BC, but not, vastly bigger, they said they would have to spend about $60 billion US to build new infrastructure for energy to be able to go 100% renewable that way. So $60 billion in an economy that size, that's a lot of money. That would be like $40, $50 billion in BC. And right now we're looking at Site C, which is going to be by the time all the bills are paid, what will it be, 10, 12 bill? So this is like, half a dozen Site Cs that they would have to build in Washington state, except they won't be Site C dams. They'll be, wind turbines all over the place. And that depends, of course, on having places to get the wind. They'd probably build a lot of it in the windier parts of the country, but they're competing with California, which is, buying up all of the renewables out there because they have such a vast population and energy needs. So it's great to hypothesize around, but when it comes to reality, I think, this is such a stretch. But at the same time, look at what's happened in Alberta. A few years ago, they said, we're going to dial down the use of coal because it's very heavy coal, just like the U.S. made that same decision. And both places have replaced coal with natural gas. In a lot of instances, they've converted existing power plants. They've also built brand new ones that are highly efficient, the latest technology, of course. And the biggest impact on greenhouse gas emissions is in places like the U.S. as a whole, and in Alberta, because of the fact that they've switched one energy source for another one that produces way fewer emissions. And that's, I think, what any reasonable person would call progress. What's happening? Well, of course, we have the whole climate fatwa on natural gas. So the practical solution that can be implemented today in a few years without really trying that hard and has enormous benefits for global climate is scorned, denied, opposed by a whole movement of people who are fixated on these costly and actually in some way quite unreliable solutions that have to be backed up by gas anyways to be effective. I'm talking about wind having to be backed up by gas. So that's really the state of discourse on energy right now in 2020, Jim, and it's really not in a good place. I mean, hopefully the quiet work being done in places like Alberta where, the utilities are really just quietly switching out the coal for gas. It's not a big deal. People are running good businesses. They're happy with doing the switch out. It's not, despite the reputation of Alberta that some people like to cultivate, it's actually the most progressive energy jurisdiction in all of Canada if you go by its results. And results are what count.
The clean fuel standard Ottawa is talking about, is that just another carbon tax? And it's pretty expensive.
Yeah, well, it's coming pretty soon. Clean fuel standard, CFS. We'll probably be hearing more about it. We've at ResourceWorks, we've been paying more attention to it. Just because it seems to be generating a lot of commentary. I talked to a lot of people in industry who are frustrated and upset. I mean, when you start to look at the situation, you understand why. So it is an instrument of the federal government that is being brought in to reduce greenhouse gas emissions very quickly. In fact, if successful, it would even exceed the emissions targets, and it will affect liquid fuels and gas fuels, so natural gas as well as gasoline that goes in your car, and solid, so that means anything that's solid, like coal is a solid. But also, kerosene, so that's what powers planes, and diesel, so trucks and the food system and tractors, fuel oil, so if you're one of those dwindling number who've got an oil furnace in your house and someone comes around every year to top up your tank with oil, you're up for the CFS as well. And so what the goal is to reduce the emissions intensity of these fuels. And in theory, it's supposed to make people who supply the fuels be more clever in sourcing ingredients to make fuels, feedstocks they're called, that have lower emissions. For example, ethanol would be a way to reduce emissions in your gasoline. That's why when you go to, some gas stations, they'll say 10% ethanol. They want to let you know about it. Not everyone wants it, but it is a greener gasoline when it's got that. And there's other ways to do that as well. They also have processes. There's carbon trading, sort of, the financial mechanics that allow these things to be lower in their intensity, even though if you burn them, they'd have the same emissions as any other. So here's some of the issues around it. Will it be affordable? So the Canadian Energy Research Institute says the cost per household on top of what everyone pays for everything already will be an extra $1,395 a year. For agriculture, $3,300 more in extra costs from that, and in total, $7,600 a year that has to be paid by those affected by it. So that's a huge amount of money at a time when everyone's kind of hurting in this pandemic year. We know that most of the energy people use is from diesel and gasoline and natural gas. That's over 50% of the consumer, commercial, and industrial and agricultural energy. So it's definitely going to have an impact. But not everyone is sitting still on it. Saskatchewan government, they call it a second carbon tax because it's applied on top of the carbon tax we're already paying for this. So according to the Saskatchewan Energy Minister, it's $15 to $20 billion a year in higher bills for Canadians. So the Chamber of Commerce, they're also starting to speak up and say, hold on a second, this will be a 30% increase in fuel costs. Now imagine if that translates to the pump, that's an extra, $20, $30 on filling an SUV, say. You've got questions on whether reductions that are being targeted by the Clean Fuel Standard are going to happen anyways under other policies. So it's just a sort of extra tax grab on things that are unfolding. So there's a number of these issues, Jim, and I think we've seen, it looks like a case where some determined policy people have got their hands on the stick in government and said, no, we're going to do this, damn the critics. Doesn't matter what the costs are, we're in charge and we're going to drive this down their throats. That's the feeling that is out there in industry. I think the federal government could respond to this by getting out there and selling it. That's what you're supposed to do with a new policy. That's kind of a job of government. You have an idea, you want to make some change. Typically you have a mandate from the ballot box. If you don't have that, you could substitute having a consultation process that's open, that considers all the facts. I think that would be a smart move by the federal government to do right now when it's not, it's not like the voters of Canada went to the polls and said, we want the Clean Fuel Standard. We want to see 30% higher costs. We want an extra $7,600 that we have to pay a year. I don't think people had a chance to vote on that. So why not open the dialogue?
Of course, too, it's not just the cost of fuel. The cost of producing food will go up. The cost of shipping that food to somewhere will go up. The cost of processing that food. And that's just the food component of the economy. As Paul Landry from the BC Trucking Association told me, everything you own was in a truck at some point.
Yeah, that's right. And if it was food, it is there because of a tractor or some other farm implements that were probably almost certainly powered by diesel. And if we're going to start, increasing the cost of that fuel, it just gets tacked on to the consumers. It's not absorbed by farmers. They work pretty hard for not great returns, and they can't afford to just suck it up.
So in other words, they should call this a 30% cost of living tax increase, and who's got a 30% pay raise lately?
Yeah, a tax on a tax, as well as the minister in Saskatchewan points out.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. His Twitter handle @SJMuir. His website, resourceworks.com. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.